was gone, hard to hang on.
Oh, I see. They built a new building. Yeah, they built a golf building.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Donna Potts. I'm president of DC Recovery, which is the long form DC Recovery Community Alliance. And all of those words in the title are important. They have a meaning for us. And I do want to welcome you and our volunteers, our board members, and some distinguished guests at the podium. Ron Clark, and we have Dr. Robert DuPont. We're going to talk about who they are a little later. But right now I'd like to take a minute just to tell you a little bit about DC Recovery. This month has been extremely busy for us, and today is a culminating activity, but we have been participating in National Recovery Month, which is designated by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Treatment Services Administration. Am I right on that? But we had an open house, as did a few other people in the area, providers and treatment people. We had a prayer breakfast, we had a rally, and what's the name of it? Reading Hill Park, Malcolm X Park, rally and health fair. We all went to the baseball game and watched the Brewers, of all people, defeat us, but it was a lot of fun. And so today we're at our conference, and we have brought together some really phenomenal people who have been working in this field, and you're going to learn more about them later. So thank you again to the board members, and at this point I want to introduce the first of our distinguished guests. And I have to say his biography was so impressive I didn't know what to leave out, so I'm going to read it all. Okay. But Dr. Robert DuPont, for more than 40 years, has been a leader in drug abuse prevention and treatment. Among his many contributions to the field is his leadership as the first director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse in 1973 to 1978, and as the second White House drug chief in 1973 to 1977. He was director of community services for the District of Columbia Department of Corrections, heading parole and halfway house services. And from 1970 to 1973, he served as administrator of the District of Columbia Narcotics Treatment Administration, the citywide drug abuse treatment program that was the model for the federal government's massive commitment to drug abuse treatment in the early 70s. Following this distinguished public career in 1978, Dr. DuPont became the founding president of the Institute for Behavior and Health, Incorporated. And I am going to stop there, but if you want to know more about him, you can read, or he may tell you himself. Thank you very much, and at this point I present Dr. DuPont.
Thank you very much, Donna, for that wonderful introduction. I am so delighted to be with you. I was asked to say a few words about recovery, and I would like to put it in the context of what you heard about my background. When I finished my training at NIH, the question was, what was I going to do with my career? And I committed myself to corrections. I came to work in the DC Department of Corrections, and it was on the evening that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. I was working the last days at NIH and came down into the city to work with the city's parole officers. And I was there when the director of corrections, Kenneth Hardy, came in and asked all the parole officers to go out into the city to help quiet the city with the riots that were going on. For those of you who were here in 1968, you know what that was like. When Martin Luther King was killed, a part of me died. I came from Atlanta and actually knew him and worked with him at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta and knew his family. And I'm not saying I was a close friend, but I certainly was involved with him. And he was one of the two people who inspired my career, the other being John Kennedy, who was also assassinated. So that brought me to the District of Columbia government in the Department of Corrections. And surprising to tell you, this building was where my office was, on the 8th floor here when we had NTA. One of the people that I worked with from the very beginning was Ron Clark. I'm going to talk about him in a few minutes. But we go back to that era, that time, when we were both young guys, working in this city together. So what I want to back up with you and talk about this word recovery and what I think of it, what it means. The term is used, people will say, well, I had surgery and now I'm recovering. And many people, particularly, and I'd say this affectionately, having worked in the government for a long time, bureaucrats will talk about it in the context of it's being kind of a throwaway line recovery. It means anything to anybody. It means, getting well from poison ivy. You recover from the poison ivy. And that is a misuse of the term in our context. And it troubles me that when it's used in that way. Recovery is about a transformation in a human being, a transformation in who that person is, how that person conducts his or her life. It is recovery that animates my professional interest in this field. It is one of the great miracles of the human experience. And to have the term cheapened, may I say, is offensive to me. So I want to talk with you a little bit about what this kind of recovery is. What's it recovering from? When I was a student, a medical student, people thought that what the drug problem was the drug addict was, quote, hooked on drugs. And the idea was that if the person stopped using drugs, he became sick. He had withdrawal symptoms. And that's what made addiction. Now, if you believe that's what makes addiction, then the simple solution is to detoxify the person, right? If the problem is the withdrawal symptoms, all you have to do is stop the person's using and he's free or she's free. But every addict has been stopped many times, often involuntarily. But stopping is not helpful. It's not a step toward recovery. In fact, it oftentimes is a reassurance to the person to keep going and keep using. But because people still to this day think about what makes addiction withdrawal, we have this incredible focus on detoxifying people as if this is going to help them. And thinking that somehow once they're done, that's it. They're going to be okay now. Now, what's amazing to me is that for 100 years, physicians like myself watched this, and if it was really true, that way of thinking about it, what would happen to a person who's detoxified, he'd come up and hug the person who's detoxified and say, "I'm free! Thank you for my freedom." The fact that nobody ever did that should have given some people thought, what's wrong with this picture? So what is the nature of the problem? And the nature of the problem is the change of the brain of the person who is addicted that changes thinking, and that in particular has two effects that are very striking. One is dishonesty. You cannot be an honest addict. You have to be a liar to be an addict. And why is that? That's not pharmacology. That's because the people who are around the addict want the addict to stop. And the addict doesn't want to stop, and the only way to keep that chemical lover is to lie. This is not complicated. It's very important. And the other thing that's characteristic of addiction is relapse. And the relapse risk is for a lifetime. It's not for a day or a week or a month. It's for life. Because the addicted brain, what I called in my book the selfish brain, the addicted brain never forgets. And that's very important because recovery is something that requires action. It's not something that's completed and put in a box and done. It's a living process that goes on for the person's entire life. Now, where does treatment fit into that? Many doctors, I am a medical doctor, many people like myself in my profession would have you believe that this is a medical disease and medical treatment, and if we give you a pill or a shot or a vaccine, you're going to be fine. That's baloney. That does not work, to think of it like that. You're not fixed. You're not done. It's not like what happens to you when you have pneumonia and you take penicillin. So what does treatment do? How does treatment work? That's what a lot of us are involved in treatment. Well, I developed some thoughts about what that is, and they may be shocking to you or even offensive to some folks. But I don't think the magic is in the treatment. I don't think it's in the professionals like myself. Now, that doesn't mean professionals can't be helpful and treatment can't be helpful. It is helpful. But how is it helpful? It is helpful by helping the addicted person and the family understand the nature of the disease and what they have to do about it. So it's an education. It's a, if you will, a brainwashing. It's a whole new language. It's a whole new way of thinking about what's going on. It's a whole new way of thinking about where one is going and how one conducts one's life and what the consequences are of continuing to use, which is continuing failure, continual pain, not just for the addict, but for everybody who cares about that addict. That's what it is. So since our treatments are all short-term, even the longest treatments are short-term, given the context of this, what is the answer? Where, Dr. DuPont, is the magic? It is not in the pill, it's not in the doctor, it's not in the treatment. Where is it? The answer is in meetings. And I want to talk to you about meetings. When I was head of NTA, I had an advisory group of young, male, former heroin addicts. I really cared about these guys. They were important to me. And I met with them regularly. And when I left NTA, I lost track of them. And I came back years later to a retirement party for one of those people. His name was Napoleon Turner. Any of you know Napoleon Turner? Does that mean anything to anyone? No, it doesn't. That's interesting to me. To mean something to you, I know that. It means something to me. He was very big on WPFW and was very involved with music, particularly the blues, and was a very public figure in the city and a wonderful human being. Well, anyway, he was retiring, and I said, now, I asked the names of the other people, what's happening to them, and one after the other, they're dead. They were all dead. Most of them died of alcoholism, not drug abuse, interestingly enough. And I said, now, how come you're alive and they're dead? And he said, Bob, that's so simple. I went to meetings and they didn't. That moved me. That changed me to hear him say that. I knew that was true. And that's a very important truth for people to understand. Another thing that I think is very striking, in my practice now, I occasionally see very rich people. Not a lot. It's not what my practice is, but I do see, and I never saw that when I was working in government. But I see people who are very wealthy with addiction. And guess where they go when they finish their fancy treatments? To the same darn meetings the poorest people in the city go to. And I want to tell you what they think about those meetings. The rich people, they love them! Because it's the only place in their lives where they're on an equal footing with everybody else. Nobody gives a damn how much money they have or how famous they are. It doesn't matter. Because those meetings, everybody is equal. And it's the only club in the world where the only price of admission is to admit your failures. There is no other club like that. And you can't get in there without doing that. And that changes everything. So my message to you is what you're doing is really, really important. You're carrying hope to people who are suffering, both the addicts and the families. And the hope has to do with getting them on a path to lifelong recovery. Some will, some won't. Some will go now, some will go later. But you need to be clear in the message so they understand what it is. And when I see people who don't have any money, I say, just skip the costly part and go to the meetings. Because that's where you're going anyhow. When the fancy treatment is done. Just skip that stage. There's no bureaucracy. There's no money. There's no license at all in where recovery is. And it's open to you and everyone. That is a miracle. Talk about being proud of being an American. One of the things that is top of my list about being proud of America is what Bill Wilson and Bob Smith did in 1935 in Akron, Ohio. That was a gift to the world. And what was the nature of that? What was that magic? And I want to tell you what I think their number one was that drove that whole miracle that is everywhere, it's spreading all over the world, was the observation that they made that Bill Wilson said the only way he could stay sober was to help another alcoholic. Whoa, you talk about a profound idea. That's why this program flourishes. Because people are inspired. Their lives are changed. And that change has to do with passing it on. To helping other people achieve that miracle. So that's my message. Now I'm going to shift gears on you and talk about what we're here to celebrate. We're here to celebrate recovery. But we got one other thing to celebrate. And another thing is my friend Ron Clark. So I want to tell you a couple Ron Clark stories and then present him with this award. I don't know how many of you know Ron Clark's background. I don't pretend to be an expert in his background, but it's a heck of a story. Ron Clark got addicted to heroin in about 1960, when he was about 19 years old. And this was in Los Angeles. Or before that, I guess it was before that. He went by 60. He started in the Synanon program. Now I got to tell you what Synanon was. So he was addicted, I guess, at 58, really. Or no, wait a minute. He was 52. 52 he was addicted. But by 1960 was when he went into treatment. That was where my number is. Okay. Now let me tell you about this. If you look at drug treatment in the country, the first modern drug treatment was Synanon. What was Synanon? Synanon was what became known as the therapeutic community in Santa Monica, California. And it was started by a fellow named Chuck Diedrich, who was a member of AA. And it was basically a cult. And you went in there and you stayed forever. You took your money in there and you lived and worked and everything happened for the rest of your life in Synanon. But what was important was Synanon spread the word that you could recover from heroin addiction. And nobody knew that before. And so what Synanon did, and it was on the cover of Time magazine, I mean, it was the publicity about Synanon was unbelievable. Now, Ron joined that program and got well, not without some bumps in the process, as he told me. But he was there for 8 years and became a leader. And I felt especially close to Ron because he also did his work in prisons, helping prisoners. And that's where I started. And I really think that is a tremendously important place to bring the message of recovery. Not because I don't like the people who are in prison, but because I do like the people in prison. And it has all to do with helping them find a path that doesn't have to do with recidivism and going back to crime and drugs, but have good lives. So then Ron did this, and then something changed in 1968 that was pretty dramatic, and that is he picked up his tent and moved to New York with some of his buddies from Synanon to start working with the other part of the country, which is really focused on drugs, and that was New York City. And he went to work with a colleague of mine named Benny Prim, who achieved this award last year, as I understand, who was a great physician working in this field. And Ron went to work for him. And then he came to Washington, and he found his home. And he started RAP. And that was a therapeutic community. It was very visible. He did a phenomenal job, and he has carried that program on now for 42 years. Now, Ron Clark brought a message to our community about recovery and about hope. And he had his own signature on that message. And that signature was, you could call it cultural relevance. I would call it cultural roots of recovery. So he had in what he was doing a signature approach to have the roots of the program deep in the community. That was his gift to our city. And he has continued to give to the city. There's no one else like it, what he has done. And he is a man of tremendous commitment, tremendous stability in what he's doing to do that, and one of the great people who it's been my privilege to know and work with over all these years. So we give the Lifetime Achievement Award today, and I'm very proud to do it, to my good friend Ron Clark for his contributions to this wonderful city.
Poster free. Smile free. And 3, 2, 1. And hope for everybody else. Thank you very
much. Love to hear from you. So.
I guess all of us are beginning to feel, as I look around the room, I see people that I hadn't seen for many years and people that I feel that I know very well because we all have been in recovery in some one stage or another. But Dr. DuPont did something I don't think it's ever been done in my 40-something years, and that is to go down into me for a moment there. And I really appreciate this award and appreciate this moment. But I have to tell you that we had lunch yesterday together. And some of the things that he mentioned here this afternoon, he had mentioned to me, I thought in terms of private, but it's not private when you talk about recovery, because it's for everybody. And after 40 years, you do question yourself about what you've done, the value of it, the importance of it, and then where do you go from there. And I also had a birthday a few weeks ago. I'm a Virgo. So I've been questioning quite a few things, and on my last birthday I was
Yeah, right.
but I've been around for a while. So I think, and I do believe that things just happen. So seeing Dr. Dupont again, and speaking with him, having lunch with him, and hearing him talk, and some questions that he asked me, and some things that he said, stirred up some things in me. And basically, in one sense, I don't know whether he was doing this by chance or he was digging with something, but he was asking me, how do I feel about what I'm doing now? And the importance of it. And I think recovery is a thing that rap has not looked into like I think we could, and I think we will. And I'll say that today. Sometimes clients come in now who know more about recovery than we do. Let me see if I can tell you why that is. We got very interested in relationship to recovery in Africa. We spent quite a bit of time talking about who we are as African people and the importance of knowing who we are and our beginnings and our roots. And I think that's one of the contributions that he mentioned that rap has made to this field, because it is important that you know who you are and where you come from, even to know where you're going. But sometimes that's very difficult to teach. I mean, because it requires someone with some skilled learning to be able to pass that kind of information on. And usually because the people in the field, the people that we hired, the people we sought and looked and went out to find, didn't have that kind of experience. We were always playing catch up. And so it became very difficult. So we would usually try to attach ourselves to a group, either here locally or nationally, who was already into discovering themselves as African people. But we knew that had to be a part of the treatment. That had to be a part of recovery. So we did the best that we could, and I think obviously, I guess we've done a pretty good job. People tell me that. Someone told me that they were graduated from rap back in 1990. First person I met when I came in the door, a very lovely young lady. I won't say it out in Emily, so I won't say who she is. She probably already said it when she goes to the meeting. I'm sure she does. So she probably has already disclosed. But the importance of that, in trying to pass that information on and start the starting point. So we're going to be doing some things, and let me stop right here and before I go any further, because actually I lost what I was and what I was saying. But an opportunity that I don't do very often to, as I look around the room, I see quite a few of my staff here. Now these are the people that do the work. They work very, very hard. And those of you in the field know that this is not necessarily easy work. It's very hard work. So I'd just like to ask them to stand for a minute. I'm really surprised. I'm glad to see all of you. Yes, even the photographer. It's part of our staff. You've got to take your photographer with you. You know, it's important. In fact, let me just say something about him. Part of what we're doing now after 40-something years is trying to go back and look at what we've done in our contribution and document it. And things just happen sometimes in rap. They just happen. David just showed up one day, and he has a background in communications and photography, and he also is quite a tennis player too. Which I'm trying to get some of that out of him.
But he showed up as a client.
Well, that's not for me to say. But there's nothing I can say after that. As Dr. Dupont was saying, the truth is very important in recovery. But as I look around the room, that fact that all of us have to. I think that there's an organization called New Beginnings, and I'm going to say something, Dr. Dupont. I'm not quite sure. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm feeling it. It might be for me, and certainly for me, and I'm with Rap. It might be a new beginning of our lunch yesterday, and what you said today, a new beginning for the organization, because I think we've been searching for something. I think that we've been kind of lost for a minute, and I see a few heads shaking there.
I pledge with all of you here to do whatever I can to be helpful to you.
Well, I think maybe we should just leave it there. And I see some heads. I just saw so many good faces. Good to see all of you. Great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. DuPont and Mrs. Clark. This time.
It takes a positive image, one with a positive image is someone who will lend a hand, spend some time, who helps someone in need and won't charge a dime. It's someone who leads the way in the fight, who makes sure every one of us